This time it's 5 classic British slopers. With the exception of retro bikes, very few machines these days actually have their cylinders mounted vertically. In the classic era, this was commonplace, but there was a period where sloping cylinders was very fashionable. So here are 5 classic British motorcycles with sloping cylinders. The Scott Squirrel. Scott Motorcycles was founded in Bradford, Yorkshire by Alfred Angus Scott in 1908. As an engineer, Scott had been trained in the use of high-speed marine steam engines, and this sparked an interest in and later affected the designs of his 2-stroke parallel twin motorcycles. And Scott was the great innovator of the age. After an initial 450 model, all subsequent Scotts were liquid-cooled 2-strokes. And to aid racing and trials competition, he developed a 2-speed transmission system too. He also invented the kickstart and was probably the first motorcycle in history to use telescopic forks, years before BMW. And Scotts were tough and reliable too. They dominated reliability trials and were the first 2-strokes to take part in the Isle of Man TT. The Scott Squirrel was introduced in 1922 and was their first road-going sports model that the general public could buy over the counter. Initially started as a 500cc, it would later move up to 600cc's. Early models used the open frame with the biscuit barrel style petrol tank. Later models would use a tank that was saddle style. Scotts would remain in production even after World War II, although admittedly in very small numbers. But the Scott is a true great classic. There is no machine in the world that sounds like the Scott yowl. P&M Panther. P&M are perhaps the fathers of the sloper motorcycle, because P&M stands for Phelan and More. And it was Joe C. Phelan who patented the idea of using the engine as a stress member of the frame, effectively substituting the front down tube with the cylinder block. Although often seen as a very traditional old-fashioned kind of a company, Phelan and More were in fact very pioneering in their early days. Problems really started in 1927 when they introduced the Granville Bradshaw designed Panther model. This was a complete commercial failure and would so damage the company's finances that they would never fully recover. Following the Panther, P&M would begin to use the Panther name on all their models. Eventually the name would be applied to the company as a whole. The 1930s would see the introduction of Panther's most famous model, and that would be the Model 100 600cc big single. And this model would be the mainstay of Panther's range right up until the end, although latterly it was increased to 650cc's for the Model 120. Panther's anachronistic, torquey, big singles would be synonymous with sidecar use. However, with cheap cars coming into the market in the late 50s, they began to lose market share, and by the mid-60s, it was all over for P&M. The last model leaving the factory in 1966. The Ariel SF31. The Ariel company was founded by one James Starley. He painted the wire spoke wheel in the United Kingdom and thus called his company Ariel because the machines looked like they were floating on air. Of course, the wheel was designed initially for use on bicycles, but Ariel would follow by producing their first motorcycle in 1902. Ariel introduced the SF31 in 1931, wanting to cash on the trend for sloper engine motorcycles. Always innovators, Ariel ran their engine much nearer horizontal than most other slopers of the day, so unlike the P&M, the engine is not a stress member in the frame. It was felt that the low-slung cylinder would aid cooling, and of course made maintenance simpler too, with the only real downside being that the machine would be rather long. The engine was a 2-valve single-cylinder unit, and yet had 2 splayed exhausts. This was very popular at the time, although Ariel did not have 2 exhaust ports, they simply bifurcated a single exhaust. The SF31 used a 499cc engine with a bore and stroke of 86.4 by 85. The bike had a 4-speed hand-changed gearbox and top speed was in the region of 75 to 80 miles an hour. But if you wanted super performance, there's even a 4-valve version. and for the more modestly budgeted there was a side valve version too. Like all aerials of the period, the 31 was a high quality, beautifully styled product. The machine was a very good sports touring model, with a cruising speed of comfortably 55 to 60 miles an hour, and was available at the time for the princely sum of £55, £60 for the 4-valve sportier version. The engine itself was really a modification of the standard upright cylinder, which was handy because, as Ariel found, the fashion for sloped cylinders pretty soon ended and everybody went back to upright cylinders again, mostly. The Vincent Comet. The Vincent Comet is unusual here because it's a post-war design, but then Vincent always did do things their own way. Philip Vincent established his company in 1928 when he purchased HRD from Howard Raymond Davies. Vincent believing that by using a well-established name, he would give his machines extra kudos rather than being new machines with a completely new and alien name entering the market. The mercurial Australian Phil Irvin would join the company from Velocet in 1931 and was set about designing their first motor, the company previously having used engines from suppliers such as J.A. Prestwick. Their first engine was a 500cc single, although this was mounted upright. This was fitted into the Meteor touring machine and gave 26 horsepower, although the Comet sports bike had a top speed of around 90 miles an hour. The Model C Comet with its sloper engine arrived after World War II. The bike used a Berman 4-speed gearbox, and like the Panther before it, used the engine as a stressed frame member. And despite low-octane pool petrol, the machine still made 28 horsepower, with the racing grey Flash version making 35 horsepower at 6,200 RPM. With the mighty V-twins, Vincent had indeed created the first superbike. But in the austere days after World War II, it was not what the market wanted. In 1955, Vincent closed for good. The BSA S series. This is my good self riding a BSA 500cc sloper a few years ago, and I have to say, of all the old BSAs and indeed of all the old motorbikes that I've ridden over the years, the sloper remains one of my true favourites. BSA launched the S series in 1927 in both side valve and overhead valve forms, and at 350 and 500cc capacities. The 500 model featured a 493cc engine with a bore and stroke dimension of 80 by 98. The bike ran a single exhaust port, and the rockers were enclosed in an aluminium cover, although the valves themselves were left open in the air. And power was then fed for a 3-speed hand-change gearbox. Early models used a duplex frame, but this was later replaced with one that used an I-beam casting as the top tube. Later models also had a 4-speed gearbox and featured twin exhaust ports because these were very trendy at the time, although of course it was believed that they aided top-end cooling. From 1930 there was a sports kit made available. This included hardened valves and high compression pistons, and to boost torque the later models were available as a 595cc both for side and overhead valve. Although in truth the bike was never really envisaged as a sporting model, but it was comfortable and very stable, and for me I found the handling perfectly adequate for the time. Cruising speed was around 55 miles an hour, with a top speed up around 75 miles an hour, with the bike able to maintain that cruising speed for long periods, being very low on vibration and very comfortable. Production would continue until 1935, when BSA simply switched back and followed the trends back to vertical cylinders. What other collections of machines would you like to see us do a video on? Maybe you've got a motorcycle we can use for a test ride. Either way, get in touch. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course thank you very much for watching.